So with ChatGPT, they have this new like enterprise thing where a company can come in and it's just for internal use, I believe. And you can upload documents like your 10K and like all of that stuff. But is this something you have to keep updating, or can the large language model eventually like figure out where to pull this data from and then give it to you? Or is this always going to be something where people have to manually enter in all of these documentations?
I mean, it depends on the system architecture and how you set it up. Like I set up a system on my own drive, right, on my own drive with my documents in it, and it automatically indexes and applies vectors to my documents. So, but yeah, I do have to put anything in there, right? It doesn't just take it out of my email. You can set it up that way. Like you can certainly say, okay, automatically add any kind of attachments I got in my email, automatically add, any kind of email I got even, or any kind of chat communication I had. It depends on, what kind of access you want to give, your AI in your enterprise. And then, I mean, you do have to also, in your architecture, you can set up things where the AI, right, the large language model is not the only component of the solution. So you have the generative AI model, like let's say you're using GPT-4 or using Google Gemini, but that's one piece of it. But you have other pieces added to it, right? Like there is probably a chain or an orchestration happening where you want to make sure that okay, this question is a mathematical question or an analytical question, and therefore I'm putting restrictions on what kind of imagination the generative AI can use. But the generative AI might be really good at understanding what the person is actually asking. But I mean, you're an analyst too, right? Like so many times what people ask is not exactly what they mean by that, So being able to translate that into kind of like a query or, a spreadsheet and what it would look like in a pivot table, I think that's where the Gen AI could be very powerful. But then you may want to add to it like a traditional SQL engine that actually then writes, the SQL and executes it and gets that back. I mean, the Gen AI can write the SQL probably too. You just want to have some guardrails around it of how things are defined.
So I want to kind of go back to our earlier conversation, and you were talking about patterns, that the model can like figure out these patterns, and you can give it kind of a big scope to play with or really restrict. With that, I'm curious what your thoughts are with decision making in AI and allowing an AI to make decisions. So in particular, I'm thinking like self-driving cars. Like how does that work?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times the questions comes up on the ethics of AI, right? Like how do we compare this? Who is responsible? And I think the vast majority of systems I see, I would call them a human in the loop, system where two things, right? Like humans constantly make mistakes. Like there's constantly someone who you shouldn't have written that email, or you shouldn't have said it that way, or worst case, like to the car example, right? Every day there's horrible crashes everywhere, right? And so people make mistakes, and the same way, a computer that has to take all these variables into consideration might make a mistake, where in hindsight, that was probably not the best path to take. That said, I do think you can probably set up a computer pretty well to take a lot of things into consideration. But in the end of the day, a decision has to come out, right? Like there has to be some sort of like, okay, I'm going to hit the brakes, or I'm going to go to the right, or I'm going to go to the left, right? Like a decision has to be made. That's why I think a lot of times right now, at least from a regulatory perspective, there's still a human with hands on the wheel that has to make a final decision. I think it's a really interesting one of like who is responsible, right? Like you can't, I don't think you can build a perfect computer, that is always going to be right on everything, because we don't even know as humans what is right all the time, like decisions that were made 30 years ago, we might not consider as the right decisions anymore now, or if you look at an election, right, like a different cycle and different people believe different things. So what is right and what is wrong is a fluid state. And so, I mean, now we're getting into philosophical, but it's, yeah, like if you go into, 500 billion variables, but you're trying to take every possible permutation into account, I don't think we'll ever have like a complete, like what is it called? Infallible, like something that is just beyond being ever wrong, right? You will never have that. And the same with a human, right? You never have a human that is never wrong.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's interesting because I see a lot of stuff about military and where AI is going to help with safety and all that stuff, but the military is pretty advanced in itself.
I'm thinking, so, okay, here's a little bit me going on a personal tangent. So we are spending as humankinds, right? Like as humanity, we're spending a lot of resources on military, right? Like against each other in essence. We're spending a lot of resources on marketing, right? Social media, marketing, trying to advertise to each other that your life isn't as great as you think it is and you should buy something to make it better, right? So we're spending a lot of resources on those things. But like, there's a lot of stuff we could do, like the MRI example, right? AI for medical research. Like we still pretty much, our life expectancy is around 85 or so, right? Like it used to be 75, now it's 85 with like 100 years of research. We haven't made all that much like progress, like physics, right? Like gravity. Like last time someone made any kind of breakthrough on how to on gravity was Einstein, right? That was a long time ago. Like, and there's so many things where humanity could apply itself a bit more, and maybe AI can help us with that, right? But I think there are very interesting scenarios we can tackle, like in discovery of medicine and in physics and testing on like molecules and all these different things where I think AI is quite interesting to be applied.